Excuse me, our next speaker this morning is Bob Schindler. He's the Operations Director of Tigris and Senior Aquatic Biologist. He's going to be speaking on the topic of Lyngbya. So I'm going to turn over the mic to Bob.
Good morning. Thank you for the invite as well. Alan reached out, and I do apologize. I didn't have time to really put something formal together. So Alan, we discussed this earlier this week, and he put some slides together, just some general topics I would say to cover with regard to Lyngbya, what it is, how we try and manage it. So yeah, I'm looking at this as more of a informal, open forum for discussion as well. It does not have to be in any way formal. So if you have any questions or anything you'd like to discuss as we're going along, please feel free to interrupt, and we can just have more of, I would say, an open forum as we go through this to review what it is. But Lyngbya, it is a filamentous forming cyanobacteria. So it's a blue-green algae, essentially, that is actually a mat forming filamentous type of algae. So as you can see in the picture there, it is not your typical planktonic blue-green algae, cyanobacteria. Again, from an industry perspective, we are getting away from generally using the term blue-green algae at this point. It's really everything is going to just either cyanobacteria or even becoming a lot more formal and using more of the scientific names, just because the term blue-green algae has become so essentially overused and can indicate a lot of different types of algae, or it's just not specific enough to the algae that you may be discussing. So cyanobacteria is really almost the common name now that we're using. Yes?
Since you're welcome to questions. Algae mats, is that Lyngbya?
That is Lyngbya, yes. So it looks a lot more on the surface when you see it like a typical green algae that most of our lakes experience at some point during the season. So the green algae are more commonly occurring different times of the year as water temperatures fluctuate throughout the season. Different genre of green algae will be present. Spring, we see a lot of Spirogyra, the real bright green, kind of as the lake starts to warm up, 50-degree water temps, you see that bright green matting. As the water temperatures warm through the 60s, in a lot of cases, that algae actually dissipates. It's a cold water algae, and it clears up on its own depending on the time of the year and water temps. This spring we actually had pretty cool water temps in through April, and we did actually, even we had to do a lot of Spirogyra management, which in a lot of years we might not necessarily have to do. But then as the season progresses, different types of green algae can form, and some of these do look somewhat similar. So that is some of the caution with regard to Lyngbya management, is that it's not just another green mat forming algae that is common. It sticks around through the season, it continues to create these filaments and develops incredible densities of algae in the water column. Yes?
You just said you did spiral analysis. What was that spin?
Oh, Spirogyra.
Spirogyra.
It's a type of green algae. It's very common in the spring.
So you did Spirogyra removal?
No. Well, we treat for Spirogyra in some cases. Yes.
So how do you tell the difference between Lyngbya and blue-green and the green algae you're talking about, spring algae? How do you discern the difference in that?
It does have its own characteristics that you can tell apart from other mat-forming algae, but it does have some lookalikes in through the season as far as compared to some green algae. Lyngbya, it's much denser. It creates filaments that can go from the surface all the way to the bottom, and we've seen 4, 5, 6 feet of water. It creates just a dense mat that other green mat forming algae, they don't do that in most cases. And And this has generally a little bit different look to it. It can actually look dark blue to black. You know, it doesn't have that typical green filamentous algae appearance to it. This is a very dark blue to black appearance to it. And when you pick it up, it doesn't fall apart. It literally, you take the whole mat to the point of it doesn't break apart.
You can weave it.
You stop, it gets to a point where you can't even lift it anymore. These mats are so dense and so, the filaments are so strong and the algal bonds are so strong that it doesn't just break apart like a typical green algae mat. It does also spread easily, so I would say that's the biggest issue that we're seeing with Lyngbya and why it's becoming such a problem is that it spreads almost like a true invasive aquatic plant. It can get stuck on waterfowl, it can get stuck on boats, boat trailers, fishing gear, and these cells can then be transported lake to lake, and it really only takes the cell to get introduced to a water body to then develop a colony of Lyngbya. So I know that's why we're seeing it more and more throughout northern New Jersey and even in eastern Pennsylvania. It's just becoming very, very common now. Yes?
Well, thank you for treating our lakes. We have 6 bodies of water. And why is this only in one of our bodies of water? And the second part of the question is, how do we get rid of it?
Yeah, I mean, why it's only certain bodies of water and the way that it can grow, some of it is definitely nutrient driven. You need more nutrients, and you need to have the nutrients in the water column for the Lyngbya to absorb those nutrients to develop and grow. So if you can manage your nutrients and have a very low, especially phosphorus concentrations in the water column, that is a way of helping to at least minimize the way that Lyngbya can grow, and also just minimize the ability of it to even be present in the water column. You know, it can start with just phosphorus concentrations and keeping phosphorus levels low. So just some ways that we do manage it. Most commonly it is algicide, copper-based algicides, but unfortunately the reality is with Lyngbya, the other bigger issue with Lyngbya compared to a lot of other algal genera, whether it be green algae, cyanobacteria, it has a very thick mucilaginous coating to it, and that's every single cell of this type of algae has that, and it's very difficult to burn through the cell walls of Lyngbya and actually get into the matting and kill the algae. So that's why if you have just an algicide management program with regard to Lyngbya management, it's probably not incredibly successful on its own. We still do a lot of algicide work for Lyngbya, but it really requires more than just your kind of typical algicide management program. You know, this is something I talked to Alan about that I would discuss here, that it's probably going to go down even you know, a potentially different road for discussion, which is okay, but the way we would really, you know, prefer to manage this is a combination of mechanical and algicide, and even not just algicide, using other types of products that are approved for aquatic use, such as bacterial formulations and surfactants that essentially act like adjuvants for penetrating through the dense Lyngbya matting, and also managing the nutrient load that is there as part of the Lyngbya, the biomass, and then having a component that helps to break down the organics that are there as part of the Lyngbya. So basically, what we've tried to do is develop a formulation. It's not proprietary to us. You know, we'll use a combination of algicide, bacterial enhancement product, and surfactants as kind of a call it an all-in-one treatment, if you will, where it's an algicide to address the algae growth and help to manage the algae, a nutrient mitigation to help bind up the nutrients as that algae decomposes, so that those nutrients just don't get re-released into the water column and the sediments. There's bacteria then there also to help break down the organic component of the algae, so it just doesn't basically die, settle back into the bottom sediments of the lake, and then regrow. We're trying to address the different aspects of the Lyngbya development, how it grows the nutrients, the organic composition in the sediments that helps to fuel that nutrients into the water column that contributes to the algae growth. The problem that we're running into now is, and my understanding is that not too many meetings ago, NJDEP was here to discuss their new HAB permitting that they've now introduced, which has functionally taken away our management approach for Lyngbya, at least within a reasonable cost perspective that I hope everyone here is probably aware of. You know, the biggest issue with the HAB permit is not the permit itself. The interesting thing is it's a free permit to the state. You know, they don't actually charge for the permit, but they require the elaborate testing to go along with the HAB permit that essentially renders our bacteria formulations and nutrient mitigation products in New Jersey almost useless at this point because of the cost factor. You know, for anybody that may not be completely familiar, basically the permit itself requires a very rigorous testing regime to support the use of these products now. The state has gone incredibly in depth as far as the number of samples, the timing of the samples, the frequency of the samples, to the point where you know, the use of these products, you know, in a single year, you may have to budget on a lake scale $20,000–$25,000 just in analytical costs to support the permit requirements for the use of these. Yes?
Well, you know, it seems like the DEP is working against us. That, and on top of the fact that now they're making us wait 2 weeks to treat what used to be every 7 days. We can't stay on top of it because we have to wait 14 days.
Right.
And that, I can't figure out why that is. Do you see that changing anytime soon?
No, and the every 14-day treatment window, that was actually because of the product label on copper sulfate. They didn't tell us that they were going to do this. It was probably been about 10 years ago now. At one point when we received the algicide, they just, the manufacturers changed I think it was the EPA required the manufacturers to change the label to extend the treatment frequency to 14 days instead of every 7.
That makes no sense.
So that, I mean, the only thing is that wasn't a local NJDEP decision. That was much higher up. But, you know, a lot of the other algicides, especially at least the copper-based one, it's every 14 days between treatments. Where was I going with that?
How do we combat HABs that you can only treat every 14 days?
Yeah, again, we were trying to use the other tools available to us in the industry that are non-pesticide, right? Nutrient management, bacterial components to the lake management, and to Paul's point, you know, a lot of these bacteria that are even sold as part of proprietary formulations, bacterial additives, a lot of it is the naturally occurring bacteria that are already in the lakes and sediments. It's really just a very concentrated form to essentially help nature break material down a lot faster than what it would naturally in the sediments. But a lot of these bacterial formulations too also put a component of the bacteria into the water column. So it's not just about the sediment. You know, there's bacterial formulations that work in the water column as well to help break down organics, break down algal cells. That is now not something that we're able to just apply anymore.
What you're applying is that attack the algae, or does it starve the algae from the nutrients that it needs to grow?
Yeah, yeah. So it's really it's about the algicide is what's going to kill the algae cells. The nutrient mitigation is should hopefully be there to absorb the nutrients that are being potentially released as these algae plants are decomposing, that the nutrients then are just not being re-released into the water column or re-released at the sediment layer. They're actually getting bound up as you're treating, especially when it comes to whether it's Lyngbya or other types of cyanobacteria management. So that's really I would say that the tough part now is that the state has taken away, for all intents and purposes anyway, for something like Lyngbya that requires a more rigorous treatment regime or treatment formulation, about not just algicides. It's about trying to address both the nutrients and the decomposition of the organic material as it dies and settles to the bottom of the lake. So what really we need to do now is address it, from our perspective, address it a little bit more mechanically. So we use harvesters, small hydro rakes to try and mechanically remove the significant portion of that biomass, get it out of the lake, which at least in that respect too, you're not just getting rid of the Lyngbya, you're also removing the nutrient load that is in all of that algal biomass as well. And then once we're able to get out the majority of it mechanically, then at least if we go in and treat with algicide, now the algicide at least has a chance to be a lot more successful because the overall biomass is substantially less than what was there before. Yes?
So if you physically rake, and call it whatever you want, weed harvest or whatever.
Right.
How often would you recommend, and with the understanding that the NJDEP has made restrictions on the other side, how often now in this environment would you recommend physically removing it? Like every 3 days, every 2 weeks, every 2 months?
I mean, probably, it's really going to be a function of the biomass in there and how rapid the regrowth is.
No, I understand, but just on the average.
There is no average.
Okay.
There really isn't. It's about monitoring the lake, just visually observing what's going on in the lake, how successful the program is that you have now, and what you're seeing as far as the regrowth of that.
And then the other question is that if you do that, you physically rake it, is that effective to reduce it the following year?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so that is part of the problem as well, is that the Lyngbya, it's like a lot of things, it's within the lake, whether it's plants, algae, it doesn't just go away seasonally. It doesn't, even if you have a harsh winter, it's not like it just dies and it doesn't come back. You see that colony of Lyngbya come back every year, and then once it starts to come back in the spring, the rate of regrowth is just extraordinary if it's not addressed.
And then the other question is, I've read this could be toxic for people, other plants, and other animals. How do you determine that? In other words, there are different kinds of, so to speak, toxicity of different strains of Lyngbya.
Yeah. So in general, Lyngbya is a cyanobacteria, and it is a potential toxin producer. Really, the only way to know if the Lyngbya in the lake is producing toxins is to do lab testing for it, which is fairly expensive. There's only certain labs that these samples can go to. A lot of cases we use Green Water Labs in Florida. They're able to run a lot of the potential toxins that these algae can produce. They can test specifically for those. The tough part with that is it's not like necessarily a test that is being done in the lake with very rapid results. It generally takes a long time and it's very expensive. Now, there are test kits that you can do on-site testing for with test strips. They are more of a presence-absence kind of result, and there's some degree of or a larger percentage of error in terms of the volume of toxin that may be there and at what concentration, as well as each one of those tests generally is only specific to the toxin that you're testing for. So you would need multiple test strips for, say, microcystin, cylindrospermopsin, saxitox, things of that nature, that, you know, the Lyngbya has the potential to produce more than one toxin, so you would have to be testing for more than one toxin.
What sounds to me is a complex thing. It could be a very long process too. As far as, would you advise lake managers to, if they see Lyngbya at the lake, what would you advise them to tell their residents?
It's a difficult conversation because you don't want to be you want to be cautious, but you don't want to cause too much fear in people using the lake. And the concern is more about from like dogs and animals than it is people. That's more where the toxin is a little bit more. But with regard to Lyngbya, if you have a Lyngbya infestation and it's been positively ID'd as Lyngbya, the biggest thing is to stay out of that area physically. Don't swim in the area where the Lyngbya is, because some of these toxins are known to just have some skin irritation associated with them. So that's really kind of the bigger concern, I would say, is the skin irritation of swimming in an area where Lyngbya is present.
So it's advise them to be careful of their animals and don't swim in the area where there's Lyngbya.
Right.
Thanks.
Yep.
As an aside, we had a giant mat break loose, and our lake is on the Longwood, on the Rockaway River. Rockaway River feeds our lake. It was pretty comical. You see it floating on the water. There's actually saplings growing in it, and it got stuck on the dam until we had a good rainstorm, and it lifted up the lip of the lake and went over the dam. It's pretty funny.
Yeah.
So offer a little bit of practical experience. We've had Lyngbya for about 30 years at our lake. So what I have to offer is not scientific necessarily, but with practical experience. To answer your questions, we have started for decades now. We pulled it manually, brakes, oars, whatever it takes. And we find that if we let it come to the surface or almost to the surface, harvest it, get it away from the lake, out of the lake, we won't see it come back in that year, and it will reduce next year's crop. In fact, we feel like we often get a couple of years reprieve if we've pulled it out and harvested it.
Where do you store it?
Wild. The second thing I would offer,
Wild?
not unwild, I'm living down.
Okay.
Second thing I would offer is the toxicity. I myself am often part of the harvesting crews. Feel like I roll in this stuff. I have never had a toxic issue. We've never had an issue with a dog or an animal having toxicity issues. So I'm not sure where that science comes from, but practically speaking, we haven't.
And that's why I say you want to be very cautious with regard to that, because you don't want to put fear into people.
So I just used it as a weed mat in my garden last fall, and sometimes we'll take it off and dump it in our woods and spread it out, just like we do our leaves and detritus.
And that is approved of? You can do that?
Well.
Yeah, just to touch on that real quick too. It's Lyngbya. It's a, what I said, potential toxin producer, like a number of other cyanobacteria. Just because they can doesn't mean they are or they will. You really have to test to know whether or not it is. And just like with a lot of the other HAB advisories, things that go out there, it's not necessarily that it is even known that the toxin is present. What is known is that a toxin-producing cyanobacteria is present, and the density of that algae makes it potentially likely that it could produce toxin. But unless you have definitive lab testing done, you don't know, just because it's there, that the toxin is actually present. And that goes for any of the cyanobacteria, whether it's Lyngbya or the other planktonic type of algae.
Could you have a lake with multiple Lyngbya mats, and like, let's say you were to test all of them, is it would they all be toxic? Or
No.
could you have like one area be, so that's why, like,
Yeah.
even if you just tested one mat and you've got a mat like 100 acres down the lake,
it's not
Okay,
necessarily going to
so
be
that-
consistent.
okay, they're
Yep,
not
same as
consistent at all.
even again the planktonic forms of algal blooms, just like Lake Hopatcong, when they get harmful algal blooms, some areas of the lake may have toxins, the majority of the lake may be completely clear and have no toxin present.
Okay.
Yeah.
You said you can have a cell be transmitted by somebody taking a boat out of one body of water and putting it into other. What about animals
Yes.
or like waterfowl?
Waterfowl is a common carrier now of Lyngbya as well. And again, so I was getting back to like why do some lakes have it and some don't? Some of it is just a function of if that Lyngbya is introduced, if there's not enough nutrients in the water column to support it, it doesn't grow. So a lot of cases that phosphorus concentration is the limiting factor of how well a Lyngbya colony may actually be able to thrive in another water body versus another one. In the back, I didn't get back there yet.
Regarding toxin testing, I think a lot of us are very familiar with the Abraxas.
Yes, the Abraxas, yep.
There's other ones that I think some vets are recommending now. I think it's 5 strands. Is that something you're familiar with?
No, not with
If
that
they're
one.
actually
Sonia, is that anything you're familiar with?
You can buy them on Amazon, whatever. Is there other ways to do toxin testing that's better than Abraxas? Is there any labs, more local?
Not that I'm aware of that are going to give you.
I mean, because when I look online at like EPA, you know, that they only list like 3, which I think might be one, is the company you look for?
Green water,
Like,
yeah.
You're not like a commercial lab, like I can't like bring you a sample to test my water for toxins.
No.
And one is Montclair, which again, you can't just drop off a sample.
Right.
So-
And some of what I've seen, at least Montclair, some of the other water quality that I've seen there, their reporting limits also are not, at least to a standard that I would like for nutrients especially. They only go to, I forget what it is exactly, but their reporting limit is not very accurate, let's just put it that way, for managing a lake for phosphorus. That's what Paul alluded to as well. It's like that you know, how many digits essentially can they go out in terms of providing your analytical result. And with phosphorus and some of these toxins, it's very critical that you get that they can give you a result that goes very, you know, to the part per billion level or whatever the case is, to know what you're managing. So that would be my concern, maybe just a little bit from what I've seen with Montclair. Again, it's probably more of a reference point than it is a decision-making level of result.
So is the Green Acres that you're talking about in Florida, is that something that we would send samples?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure
to?
Green Water Labs, I don't think you have to be a lake manager or anything crazy like that. I do think they accept just results from everywhere. The problem with Green Water is you're gonna wait probably 2 to 3 weeks for a result, is really the issue there. So if you think you have a toxin producing algae, it's going to be faster to manage that algae than it is to wait for the result to know whether or not it's producing toxins, essentially.
It just seems like a key piece of the puzzle is missing here, like why wouldn't it be a resource that you could determine the toxins? are?
Right.
And the DEP lab, although useful, I think we're all not calling them, you know, we're all not gonna call them, which is a big problem.
Right, and yeah, I don't know if anybody else has this experience that DEP is not always receptive to receiving private samples as well. I think they're mostly,
They have to do the private.
they're having to do the collection and they're not all that interested in private lakes necessarily. Yeah, yep.
Well, the 2 to 3 weeks to get results from like green water, is that because they need to incubate the sample for?
Yes.
So there's no way to really get it faster?
No, from a lab analytical perspective, no. So that's why the Abraxas test strips have been so popular. Again, my only caution to the Abraxas is it's more of a presence absence. You're basically trying to read the colors on a test strip. Now there are machines that you can buy that you can put the test strips in that will give you at least a little bit better idea, and I think that's probably anybody that has that level of concern, it's probably the way to go.
How expensive are those?
I forget. Sony, do you know anything, the readers for the Abraxas?
I'm not familiar with that.
Okay.
Like normally like colorimeters or colorimeters, right, like they're somewhat costly depending, right, if it's more expensive, the more accurate it is typically.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think it's better to be able to ID your algae versus to test if there's toxins. All the places that I've worked around the US, right, if you suspect an algal bloom that might be toxic, you usually let people know and close it down for 2 weeks while you wait for that result.
Right.
So it does take quite a bit of time, and I caution anybody to let their dogs drink out of any algae-filled water. I usually don't, because even if it's not toxic to them, it's still not good for their digestive system, and you'll end up having problems later in your house probably.
Yeah.
So that's just my word.
And that's why the state went to that algal density thresholds for their different levels of advisories instead of just purely toxin testing. They basically look at it and say, based on the density of algae at different thresholds, the potential increases as the density of the algae increases. Again, that's also not a safe statement because you can have very low densities of cyanobacteria and still have toxins. So it's a very difficult management aspect of whether it's Lyngbya or other types of cyanobacteria.
Those readers, do they have to be recalibrated frequently?
Typically, I mean, depending on how many samples you take, anything that's making a reading, you want to make sure that you calibrate it regularly. And usually those are offered online too, the solutions.
Have you found that lakes with more like native aquatic vegetation do better at, does the native aquatic vegetation outcompete the Lyngbya for nutrients, or is
No.
it still taking over?
It still takes over. Yeah, and I have a lake in the Poconos that we just started working with this year and never really had any management work done, about a 500-acre lake. And they reached out because they were concerned about increases in native plants and water shield initially. That they were just seeing increases along the shoreline, and they wanted us to come out and start monitoring and managing if needed to just, again, not eradicate the native plants, but just at least manage, keep the native plants to certain portions of the lake. First time I went out there, they have extensive Lyngbya along a large portion of their shoreline that they didn't even know that was there.
With the native plants?
Yeah. Yeah, and this is a relatively low nutrient lake in the Poconos, and it was thriving there very well along the shoreline. So unfortunately, we discovered a problem that they didn't know existed, and it's already turning into a pretty significant problem through just this season of being out there. So no, it's not really something that native plant densities populations are helping to combat nutrients, like we can see with a lot of lakes with regard to typical planktonic cyanobacteria. You have healthy native plant populations. In a lot of cases you can help limit the abundance densities of planktonic cyanobacteria by keeping some of that nutrient out of the water column being absorbed by plants. Doesn't seem to translate with Lyngbya at all. It just takes over the areas where it's introduced and colonizing. So I just put this picture up here too. This is what we use as well for Lyngbya management. It's called a Truxor. It's similar to some other machines that I know are located here in North Jersey. This has multiple attachments. It can be used as a hydro-rake. It can be used as a harvester to remove plant material, algal biomass, the associated organics. So again, really to touch again on the Lyngbya itself is that we have seen very high success in controlling Lyngbya with the combination treatments that I spoke about, not just doing algicide, but addressing the nutrients and the organic composition of the algae as you're controlling it. The state has now taken that out of our hands, really, for the most part. There are some tools in the toolbox, I would say, that are sort of left aside from the HAB permit. The HAB permit was very specific, the way it listed out the products that are being regulated under that permit. So there are some that are still available that we're going to continue to work with until the state tells us, oh, we're going to throw this one on the permit now too. And again, this is not proprietary formulations to Tigris. This is industry stuff from Natural Lake Biosciences and other manufacturers that we work with to try and come up with essentially formulations that can be more successful with this. And the sad part is, with the regulations, we can reduce our algicide use by utilizing these other tools. So we don't have to go in necessarily at max label rate of chelated algicide when we're using these other, not proprietary, but other products, bacteria, nutrient mitigation tools. Now this just pushes us to say, you know what, the only way we're going to manage something, especially like Lyngbya, when you're talking about matting that's 3 to 4 feet thick, is repeat applications at the max dose rate that we're allowed on the algicide label to be successful. And that in of itself has some risk, right? There's Lyngbya mats, they're in shallow shoreline areas. They're where your fish are using for fish spawning. So we have to be very careful around that too, because it doesn't matter if we're trying to manage Lyngbya. We have to be very cautious of knowing that there could be some collateral impacts as a result of trying to manage something especially specific to Lyngbya and how aggressive you have to be with regard to that. And then also with Lyngbya, the matting itself, especially through the summer in shallow areas, maybe where it's a little bit more stagnant, it absorbs a lot of sunlight and heat. So your water temperatures, generally where the Lyngbya is a lot warmer than other areas of the lake, which is going to then, what I've seen is other types of cyanobacteria, planktonic algae, start colonizing within the Lyngbya because the water temperature is so much warmer and there's nutrients there that you'll see Lyngbya, like these mats of dark black Lyngbya, and then you'll start to see the bright green, something like a microcystin or Ephamazoninon, Anabina, now growing around the Lyngbya because the water temperatures are so hot in those areas, and it creates more stagnant water that you can actually get even more water quality degradation in the area of the Lyngbya growth. So that's another caution of what can happen in those especially calm water areas, stagnant areas with high concentrations of Lyngbya.
Is the truckster machine any different, better than a bee harvester for the Lyngbya?
It's a smaller machine, so we can access shallower areas. The one benefit of the truckster as well is that it's amphibious, so we don't have to rely on one shoreline area necessary or moving the material from where you're working. You know, we try to look at the logistics there, that the machine can drive in and out of the lake depending on the access. Now, NJDEP has been gracious enough to put more restrictions on us from that perspective as well. So basically, yeah, I'll just touch on this too, is that under land use regulation, DEP has actually put more specific language out there, even right on their website, with regard to dredging. And they're calling it dredging now. So we've gotten away from what I think for a long time we said we don't like to use the dredging word. We like to say we're hydro raking.
Yes.
But what DEP has done is say it's lake dredging, right? So, and it's right on their website, right on the land use page of their website, where dredging is the removal of sediments or inorganic material from the open waters of the lake, does not require a permit at all, right? The caveat to that is that you cannot disturb wetlands, right? So it's it's what they consider the wetlands. Now, for the most part, what I've seen is that the state defines the wetland as the riparian transition area from the open waters of the state to the upland area, the shoreline edge, essentially. The state is going to classify pretty much the entire shoreline edge of a lake pond as a freshwater wetland. So when we're doing this type of mechanical work, we have to be very careful about disturbing the shoreline edge as part of a mechanical operation. So what I'm saying to that is we can't necessarily be backing our equipment in or driving the equipment in and out of a lake, disturbing or impacting the riparian wetland without having a freshwater wetlands permit.
But a boat ramp would be permissible.
Yeah, so what they say, even in I think it's even in the regulations and in the language on land use pages, you have to use an already established means of egress into the lake, a beach, a boat ramp, something like that, to get the equipment in and out. A lot of the lakes that we manage, they do not have boat ramps, right? We're backing our trucks and trailers over shoreline edges just to access the lake. As far as the state's concerned, that's an impact to the wetland. So we have to be very careful about, what we're doing there and the disturbance to the shoreline edge for a lot of our activity.
Regulated or not regulated?
No, hydro raking is not regulated as long as you are removing sediments, accumulated organic material from the open water of the lake or pond. You have to be careful about that shoreline disturbance is really the issue. Yeah.
On the truckster machine, what is the minimum depth that you can use this machine?
8 to 12 inches of water depth is about the minimum operating depth. Yeah, to really be able to work and maneuver on the water. Yeah.
And if there are tree stumps in the bottom?
Yeah, tree stumps are a problem. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean that's really a problem for any type of mechanical equipment because the hydro rakes are not excavators. They cannot go in and rip out stumps that are embedded into because that's actually going to be considered a regulated activity because now we're grabbing a tree stump that's embedded into the original hard bottom of the lake. Now if we're disturbing the original hard bottom of the lake, that becomes a regulated activity.
Thank you.
Yeah, 2 questions. Number 1, how do we eliminate DEP? Number 2 is, we have Lyngbya, and we do mechanical, which I find takes 2 to 3 feet long. I get in a boat and I start pulling slowly with big mats, 8, 10 feet long, fill up the rowboat, and you can see when it reaches the bottom because the brown comes up, the leaves come up. How stupid am I to pile that crap on my lap in the boat and then get rid of it? Without going through the complicated process.
Again, I think I would rely on the real world experiences like we heard of.
Just do
Say that.
Tell my grandkids it's okay, they can keep doing it.
If you're concerned, we're Tidex. All right? We're Tidex too.
It's again, I'm trying to discuss this with you of kind of the real complexities of Lyngbya. And the reality is, if you Google search Lyngbya, it's going to return that it's a toxin-producing cyanobacteria. Whether it does or not, in reality, in most cases, it's not going to.
Yes, Bob. For the tractor machine, what's the minimum amount of time Tigris would want it on a body of water?
The nice thing about the truckster is that it's very easy with regard to mobilization and transport. So we have clients where we're only at their lakes for a day or 2.
Okay.
This is something that's towed behind a 3/4 ton pickup truck.
So we're talking a minimum of a day.
Yeah, I mean, depending on the site, where you're located, things of that nature. But that's the nice thing. It's not like when we're mobilizing the big hydro rakes or the harvester that we have to say, no, we need to be there for a week because of the logistics, because of the transport costs and all of that. The truckster's a lot different, where it's literally more like just launching a big airboat.
Okay. And hourly rate or daily rate, whatever?
Generally, we have a daily rate of about $3,000 for the equipment and a 2-person crew. And then it goes up from there if we need a transport barge. Again, we would need to look at the areas that we're working, disposal sites, how we access to really come up with exact costs and a plan and disposal. And keep in mind too, the disposal of this material, even though it's organic material, you have to be careful about how you dispose of it. You cannot just take this and put it anywhere. The caution is you cannot remove the material from the lake and put it anywhere near a wetland area. So you have to take that into consideration as well, that wherever you're disposing of the material, you have to make sure that it's being done in an upland area with a good 200-300 foot buffer from a potential wetland.
I agree with my friend from Gunnar, like I grew up on it. It makes great art.
Right.
When we operate with AA now Tigris, we would dispose of the sediment on our property. Are we still allowed to do that? And if so, could we take the Lyngbya and put it back there?
Yes, you can still just dispose of it on private property, again, as long as you know could not in any way be classified as a wetland or a wetland riparian area. As long as it's clearly an upland area, you can still dispose of it on private property.
You said 200 to 300 meters away, or?
Generally, the wetland buffers are 100 to 300 feet from, you know, your area disturbance. 300 feet is what I would suggest, just because there may be some differences based on the classification, but I would say at least 300 feet. Yeah.
The truckster machine, when it's removing the Lyngbya, is it also removing milfoil or other things?
It can, yeah. It can be selective to the Lyngbya, but it can act like a true harvester for removing submerged plants, or, you know, we have different attachments that can remove organics.
And
You know,
what depth?
only down to 2 or 3 feet with the truckster. Yeah. I mean, once you get a little bit deeper than that, we would want to use more of a traditional hydro rake, or if it's plant material, we would want to use more of a traditional harvester for that.
So how do you define shoreline area then, 2 to 3 feet? You were saying permanent.
The state really looks at the plant species. So if that's where they look at that transition. So even if you go on their land use page, and they'll define freshwater wetlands as the removal or disturbance of freshwater wetland plants, which is then generally like your emergent wetland plants that grow on the perimeter of the lake. But even something like cattail, Phragmites, if you're working in an area where you're disturbing those plants, you are actually now destroying wetlands. So that's what we have to be cautious of. That's how they're going to look at it. It's that plant, it's the plants and that transition zone and what it looks like. So we can go out in the open water, remove unconsolidated sediments, accumulated sediments, organic material without a permit. But as soon as we go in and start disturbing something like cattails, as far as the DEP is concerned, that's going to be impacts to freshwater wetlands. And it doesn't mean we can't do it, but it means it's got to be permitted. And the freshwater wetland, just to go get a freshwater wetland permit, we don't even do it in-house because we don't have that kind of time and staff to do it. You know, we sub it out with our clients too if that becomes necessary. But you're talking $10,000 to $15,000 just to get a freshwater wetland permit from the state, because it's not even so much the permit fees from the state, it's the amount of time that it takes to go through all the check boxes as part of these permits, and what you're going to pay an engineer or a consultant to do to actually then satisfy all of the requirements of the permit. That's where most of the expense is.
All right, last question.
Is that permit, once you get a permit, you spend the $10,000 to $15,000, is that good for 5 years or just a one-time use?
No, generally 3 to 5 year permits for the wetlands.
Can
Yeah.
that be extended?
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure there is a way of extending it as long as you're essentially doing the exact same type of work. Yeah, but there's some differences there as well, depending on the scope of work though too,
So-
and the area.
So as things get more complicated, as things go on, if you can get that permit now, and then extend it 3 times over a 20-year period, that would be effective, cost effective.
In theory, yeah. So again, it's just, that's what we have to look at though, and when we're putting a project together is we do not want to have to go down the road of the wetland permits. We try to do as much management within their definition of an unregulated, and it says it, I go to their land use regulation page, all the language is there where they define what dredging is for the open waters of the state versus when you click on the freshwater wetlands tab, what dredging is under a freshwater wetlands tab and what they define it there. So, but that it's a little bit better than it was years ago, not even all that long ago, where it was a gray area. Now they've taken at least some of the guesswork out of it and defined it.
Thank you, Bob. We're going to take a brief break.